We are on the scientific conference. You had a really nice presentation about varroa control with Formic Protect, an overview of theoretical and applied research on formic acid. But I have a simple question. What, maybe first, can you present yourself for Polish beekeepers?
Absolutely. I'm Dr. Heather Broccard-Bell. I am the Chief Researcher at NOD Apiary Products in Ontario, Canada. I come from an academic background, so I actually studied honeybee communication from 2014 to 2021 at the University of California, San Diego. I also was studying pesticides and pathogens and the effects of pesticides and pathogens on honeybee cognition and behavior. In 2021, I transitioned into industry and took the position with NOD Apiary Products to be their researcher, and now my job is largely field studies. I do some laboratory work, I do product development, and I also do educational outreach, such as speaking at conferences.
No, it's amazing. And I have, as I said before, a simple question. What should be done to have high efficacy of varroa treatment in apiary? Because I think it's many factors, and please give them strictly and clearly.
Sure. Do you want me to speak specifically about formic acid or in general?
Maybe in general, but after that, a little bit about formic acid.
Specifically. In general, I mean, I think it's key to understand the product that you're using and when it's best applied. So timing is going to be really important, and timing will feed into which products you can even use and which ones are best adapted for use at the time. Another really key thing is to make sure that you understand what your varroa loads are, so monitoring your colonies, making sure that you're doing alcohol washes or sugar shakes, or even might fall on sticky boards, although it's a little bit harder to tell from that, but doing some form of monitoring so you have a good feel for what the varroa loads are in your colony, so that when you are treating, you know if the products are working or not, and that is really crucial. And even the best varroa control out there, there's nothing that's 100% perfect. So if your loads are really high before you treat, it's very likely, regardless of what you use, and even if it's totally appropriate for the time of year, that you will need to retreat. But that's why you need to be monitoring. And then lastly, I would say that it's always good practice when you are treating for varroa that you treat all of the colonies in a yard at the same time. And that is to prevent the risk of reinvasion. So even if you have lower loads in some colonies and you think that you maybe shouldn't treat those, it is better to treat everything, even if there are some with lower, and then that minimizes the varroa load across the entire apiary.
Yeah, thank you very much for this information. I can only ask beekeepers, listen to this voice. It's really nice. But going to the formic acid, some Polish beekeepers are afraid of using formic acid. Of course, we said formic acid in veterinary product, and they could be afraid about, for example, queens using acid, formic acid?
So I will say that formic acid is a little bit different than a lot of the varroa control that people use. A lot of the varroa control products that people use are contact products, which means that the bees and the mites actually have to move around inside of the colony and touch the strips, or however it's being presented, in order for it to work. One of the big benefits of using formic acid is that it's a vapor, so it wants to be a gas at room temperature, at ambient temperature, and that has the big benefit of you don't have to rely on the bees touching it, you don't have to rely on the mites touching it, because it goes everywhere, it diffuses throughout the colony. I guess just to back up for 1 second before I get into this, the key to understanding, or the key to using formic acid effectively, is to understand its physical properties. And when you understand its physical properties, then you're going to be much better, you're going to be able to much more tightly control how it's being used in your colonies. So that's a mistake that people make, is they think that Varroa treatments are all the same kind of thing. They think that it's a contact and that it can be used the same way that a contact can, and it can't. I mean, to some extent, yes, but you need to understand environmental conditions, and you need to understand things about how your hives are structured. So that if the fact that it's a vapor, so as I said, it has the significant advantage of you don't have to rely on the bees moving it around. But then the other thing is that the bees do move it around. They move it around by fanning inside of the colony. And fanning, that behavior changes depending on several things. It changes depending on the outside temperature. So the bees want to regulate the temperature inside of their hive. When it gets too hot for the brood to be reared effectively, then they start fanning to cool it down. Now, if you're applying formic acid above brood rearing temperature, so above about 33 degrees, or even slightly lower than that, the bee's behavior changes. Same thing if you're applying it at low temperatures. So when it's 10 degrees or so, that's about clustering temperature, the behavior of the bees changes there as well. And it's difficult to make an overarching statement about what the impact is when you apply it when it's too low or too high, because that will depend on the size of your colony and the time of year as well. But what I will say is that the outcomes are just much less predictable when you apply it outside those temperature ranges. So you pick times when the daytime high temperature is somewhere between 10 degrees and 29.5 degrees. That's daytime high. It doesn't matter if it gets lower than that at night. If you do it there, we've done a lot of testing, and other people have done a lot of testing on formic acid. That's when you're going to have good outcomes. Another really key factor, as I mentioned, the bee's behavior is changing how formic acid vapors are moving around. You need to make sure that you have strong colonies. If you do not have a sufficiently strong colony, and we say a minimum of 10,000 bees, in Langstroth equipment, that's about 5 to 6 frames of bees. I think that the Polish standard equipment is maybe a little bit smaller than that. But you want to make sure that you have about 10,000 bees, because if you have fewer than that, they are not going to be able to effectively flush out the vapors, and you risk overdosing them. Another really key thing, and this is different from, and really different from using contact chemicals, is you need to make sure that your hives are properly ventilated. Formic acid is heavier than air. It's very similar to dry ice, if you've seen this, so frozen carbon dioxide. When you put it at room temperature, it sublimates out into a gas. You can see it kind of doing this. Formic acid works the same way, you just can't see it. So it's heavier than air, so it's going to want to leave the bottom of a colony. So you want to make sure that you have a fully open bottom entrance. No robbing screens, no guards of any kind, because then you run the risk of things building up behind that and blocking the airflow. So you want to make sure that that is totally open, at least during the treatment period. So that's 7 days for Formic Protect. At the same time, because it is a gas, and you want there to be a sufficient amount of that in there so that it actually effectively kills Varroa, you don't want there to be too much ventilation.
Okay.
So if you are using screen bottom boards, which people do to monitor the mite drop, you need to make sure that that inspection tray is inside there. So I know that that beekeepers the world over sometimes will run screen bottom boards without the inspection tray because they think that that controls Varroa. You can do that. Just make sure that when you're treating, that it's not open, because then you're going to lose any of the formic acid vapor. Is just going to fall right out the bottom. So those I think are the main points. If you can adhere to that. Actually, one more point before we move on. You mentioned queens. So queens is a constant concern that people have, and I hear this over and over again. So actually, I went about a year ago, I went through and I looked for every study that had ever been done on Formic Protect that tracked queen outcomes. Now, some of those were done by us internally. Some of them were done in good laboratory practices labs, and these are the labs that generate the data that support registration of a veterinary product. And some of them were actually done completely independently in academic labs, and we didn't have anything to do with it. So altogether, there were 13 studies included in that. When I actually looked at the rate of queen loss between the treatment group, 2 strips of Formic Protect, versus a control group, which was a negative control, so nothing at all, there is no statistically significant difference in 12 of those studies. There was one that did show that there was a higher rate. So what I will say is it can happen. Queen loss can happen. But it is not nearly as common, I think, as what people think it is. And I really feel that that is because beekeepers, for good reason, are not running negative controls. So if you don't know what the rate of supersedure or queen loss is in the background, you can't say for sure that the treatment caused anything additional. And I will say, from having done research for the last 4 years fairly intensively on this product, at certain times of the year, there's just a lot of supersedure happening. But I have yet to run a study where I could actually definitively say it was the formic acid that caused this to happen.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And I think the last question, in your presentation there was a very interesting data about viral loads in the bees that are treated with formic acid. Can you tell us something more about it?
Yes, so I have been running a study for the last 2 years, and full disclosure, I haven't fully analyzed all of these data yet because we have other things going and I just haven't had time yet. So preliminary data that we analyzed from last year's round of the study, you can see immediately after treatment with formic acid, the viral load and the viruses that we were targeting specifically is deformed wing virus B, because that is the one that's also known as Varroa destructor virus 1. This is the virus that is most closely associated with Varroa. It's not only transmitted by Varroa, but it's also amplified inside the body of the Varroa. Immediately after treatment with formic acid, you can see those virus numbers dip. Now, I will say that that effect does not last forever. So my advice based on those findings is make sure that you're timing your treatments to when they're going to be, when that dip in viral load is going to be the most beneficial. And to my mind, that's 2 time points. One is very early in the spring, before the colony gets going. You want to make sure that you're starting the year with a low Varroa load and consequently a low viral load. And then the other really crucial time is right when your bees start producing the winter bees. So you want to make sure that that viral load is low because you want those bees to be strong and healthy so that they can make it through the winter.
Thank you very much for all your answers. I think it's basic for good beekeeping all over the world, not only in Poland. So beekeepers, please listen it and do it like this way. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
You're welcome. Thank you.